Podcast called Signal Quest with BBHK.
Hi, Harish. It's interesting to know you by your four initials, but Harish, it is for me.
Okay. So let me get the ball rolling with what I thought was a tough question. Let's see if it's really tough for you or not, right? You've spent decades analyzing India's growth, policy, markets. You've really spent, your time and life and career in multiple areas and domains. And now you're building Thurro. So what's the most counterintuitive insight you've arrived at about how data can surface the true growth signals in India?
Let me start at the very beginning, as they say.
Yeah.
So it was interesting that in the initial part of my career, I ended up becoming something called a sell side analyst, which meant that we would look at a lot of data to come to sort of conclusions on whether this is a good stock to buy or not, and whether the company is doing well or not. Um, Incidentally, I did a startup and then came back to sell side again. And at that point in time, I realized that stock picking is not for me. But what is for me is the ability to look at big picture worldviews and see what is changing in the country, in the economy, in the society, in business dynamics, etc. And I would write a lot about all of these changes taking place in India. Indeed, that is what became my first book, The Making of India. So my a large part of my career was shaped by trying to find new data sources in very, very diverse fields, and then trying to make sense of how that fits in into the big India story. And this is largely in the 2010s that we are talking about. And that is the time when India was changing significantly. One, it was growing. It went through its pangs of what was then called policy paralysis, a significant inflation bout. There was a global taper tantrum, which meant that the rupee also crashed somewhat at that point in time. And post that, there was a period of a lot of reforms that came through in the country, etc. So a lot of things were changing. And at that point in time, just trying to get different data sources to make sense of that story of India meant that I'd scour around just about anything that would be made available, whether companies reporting something, whether independent experts talking about it, whether the government talking about it, regulators giving out data, industry associations giving out data. And I would meet a lot of different types of people. What has changed in the last 15, 20 years of me doing some of these things is that the sheer quantum of data that is now available across the sectors is just gone through the roof. What is now in demand, or what we need to think about, is our ability to process that data. And by that, I don't mean the physical technical capabilities of a GPU or a CPU of processing that data, but how do you bring that data to bear? What data sets do you align with each other, and how do you make sense of that big picture story? And maybe we'll talk about some of those examples as we go by. So maybe it's not counterintuitive, but what I have seen is the huge growth that has taken place in the last 15, 20 years in the way we can now think about the India story in depth across different segments and sectors.
Right. And that brings me to an interesting, sub question there, Akhilesh. When you said you were, really looking for data. So do you start with data first, or do you, have a hypothesis and say, okay, like I want data for this, because both will have, different ways in which you'll go about it. Are you a data nerd, or are you a believer in a story and looking for the data to back it?
So two answers jump to me immediately. The first is what I was taught in MBA, that it depends. Uh, and the second is what my first employer, BCG, taught me, which is always start with the hypothesis. Otherwise, you will boil the ocean and still not reach anywhere.
Right.
Right. And so, as with everything in life, the answer is somewhere in between. You need to have a broad directional hypothesis of what is it that you're looking for. And especially if you're writing about macro issues, more than hypothesis, I think what is useful is to have the framework of what works in this country, or how the country works, or how sectors work, or what are the big themes that you're looking for. Once you know directionally some things work or some things don't work, then trying to find data sets for that are very, very useful. Having said that, why did I say it depends? Sometimes you just chance upon an interesting data set, you keep playing with it. Hopefully, again, going back to my consulting days, you don't torture it till it reveals what you wanted to reveal. But if you keep playing with it, sometimes something very counterintuitive or interesting emerges. I'll just give you a quick example on that. We were looking at a lot of toll roads in India, and we put them on a map, and then you color code them to see which toll has been growing or not growing. And then certain months you will see that some tolls are suddenly not growing in a line or growing dramatically in a line. And then you realize that the reason that's happening is because either there has been a sudden export import bump, and so the goods that travel from the port to the hinterland of India have either suddenly gone up or come down. Now, it's very different, and unless you keep playing with this data, you may not even think about this interlinkage. But in most cases, you need to have a thesis of why you are looking for it. And that thesis, as I said, could be a framework. My favorite framework is something called the private cost of public failure. The idea that there is significant public failure in many cases, which requires people to invest in their own well-being, in their own ease of life, etc. And so I try and look at what may be different in this sector, what may not be working in this sector, and how are people responding to that. Uh, and so those are some frameworks that I would use, or some playthings that I would use in a sense of visualization to try and see where data is taking me.
Right. And how easy or difficult is it for you to be ascetic when you are looking at data, in the sense that you don't get to, as- attached to a hypothesis? You are human after all, you will have your own biases. But you will, the other question that I also wanted to add there was, is there a value or merit in the fact that you are rooted in India, or you are exposed to, or you are aware of the real ground realities, for you to make a better hypothesis and then go and test with data? Two questions there.
So, 100% it is useful that one is situated in the area that one is talking about, but more than just the physical situation of it, if you also go back to at least my style of trying to understand what is happening in the economy or the sectors, etc., is to meet with a large number of diverse people and just try and understand what they are saying about this. It has obviously become much easier in our day and age, where you can read about a lot of people, what they are saying, what maybe companies may be saying, governments may be saying, or obviously you could hear them out on a podcast. Again, we are somewhat privileged. We can also go out and meet with these people one on one to try and understand deeply about that. So it's the ability to engage with the human on the other side of the data in some sense, which is very, very powerful in shaping how one thinks about the narratives, and eventually what conclusions or narratives one can reach. Am I ascetic? To go back to your first question, um, I am agnostic, because in many cases, what happens is, what you need to understand is what is the data trying to tell you. What is a challenge from one dimension will almost automatically be an opportunity from the other side, right? So that then becomes a question of a narrative of how people should think about what they need to do with the data. The fact that data exists, the fact that it can tell you something about it, is, I think, very, very useful, and people can make good use of that. uh, you can look at the same data set and feel depressed about it or elated about it, but that depends on which side of the table you are sitting on, right? So I am agnostic in that sense. It should tell you the story.
Right, right. And you said, you started around 2010 on this particular journey, and that's where, sort of sources of data just exploded in India. How was it before that? Do you have any sense of that? How bad was it? And how was the feeling like when you suddenly realized, oh, there is this data that I now have access to? So what changed, and was there a pivotal moment when it changed? And if so, do you remember that moment, and how you felt about it?
You are almost going into the setup of saying that how does one go bankrupt slowly and then suddenly. No, that was not the framework. I think what has happened is, it gradually, as I think digitization has taken hold across various life processes, naturally a lot more data has both emerged, can be aggregated, can be disseminated, and there has been a movement towards generally being more open with data, whether you think about it from a regulatory perspective, as companies list and when they remain listed, that they need to put out, or from, think about the Right to Information Act that came into the country, which meant that the government was also a lot more responsive naturally. So the idea is that the data, one, getting generated became much easier. The generation of data itself became much more easier. uh, the folks who were collecting it and disseminating it found that their lives were so much easier. And then I think there is a interesting sets of communities that have emerged which make use of that data, again all the way from people in the investing community for whom they would invest a significant amount of money, corporates would do that, and all the way up to activists who would ensure that the data that comes out is right, in a sense, right, who will do the RTIs, etc., and ensure that everybody is kept to the straight and narrow to the extent possible. So it's been a lot more about the journey that has taken place with respect to data. Now, for example, that port example and the toll example that I gave you, the fact that we now have fast tags attached to our cars and trucks and vehicles, etc., and the fact that that RFID is connected in many cases to bank accounts which are digitally linked, and that there is an entity which collects all of this data and disseminates it out for the wider usage of the wider ecosystem and industry. Many of these things are building blocks and Lego blocks in some sense that have come through over the last very many years. And so to that extent, it's interesting to see what all data sets are already available. There are quite a few that I hope can be made a lot more available. And that would make understanding what is happening so much more granular, so much more better. But across sector, we've seen the ability of us to collect data and disseminate it has become just so much wider, and the intent to disseminate it has become so much wider.
And do you generally see India, and I know it's a very broad brushstroke that I'm talking about, becoming more and more aware of being digital native, data native more than digital, let's say data native? Do they understand the value of it, and are they actually doing something with and about it?
So different segments are at different levels of maturity. Again, I have been lucky to have had grounding of using of data in the world of finance, where people understand, appreciate the value that data brings to the table. In any case, it is all about numbers, and data in general has been about numbers. It's an interesting world that we are now in, where a lot of computational metrics that we think about are large language models and not just large numerical models, right? So that is an interesting trend, and maybe we can talk about that later. But generally, data has been about numbers, and in finance, that is what we would look at also a lot. So that's been my training and grounding. I think and I've had the opportunity to also work in the public sector on the government side, right? And there, while in many cases there is an intent to collect and disseminate that data, in some cases there are some reservations also on how that data could potentially get perceived. Does that data breach some sort of confidentiality requirements, or company strategic information could potentially get given out, etc.? And there are some concerns that come in from that side. Again, how do you disseminate, in what form and quality do you disseminate, etc.? Again, various government agencies and departments are at various levels of maturity to put that data out. Indeed, one of the key genesis of Thurro has been the fact that just collecting a lot of these different data points from sets of people who give that out, again, whether government, regulators, companies, industry associations, etc., they are at such different levels of maturity that sometimes you will get a scanned PDF as a response. Sometimes you will get the most fastest API, which will give you the data in the format that you want it, right? So there is an entire spectrum. So to that extent, people are at different levels of maturity in dissemination as well as in consumption. As I said, in the world of finance, a lot more people do it. Do we as citizens, for example, consume data as much as we should? I think again there is a good journey. If you look at what many of the daily newspapers, whether business newspapers or regular newspapers have started to do, are starting to have data journalists, data columns, etc., where they will call out data, put them in a visually appealing manner such that people understand, and there is a reasonable and decent engagement that many of these features get. So I think people are beginning to recognize that there is a significant amount of data available. Are we using data all the way from it wowing us to policy design and shaping? I think again depends by sector, but in many cases there is a long journey that all of us have to traverse.
And what do you think should leaders, whether they are leaders of a government body or whether they're leaders of a startup, or whether they're leaders of an MNC. Just think of all, the entire spectrum, right? What should they be thinking about when they think about making their organizations more or better data native? I don't know if grammatically that makes sense, but I guess you get my point.
Sure. So, one of the most interesting things that I have found when you talk to anybody with respect to data, and I'm not talking corporate sector as of now, they have the understanding of what data they have with them. What are their customers saying? Which of their products are selling? How many employees are coming in, going out? Attrition is happening, etc., etc. And they would do a lot of analysis on their internal data. The fact that a lot of external data is available about your competition, about the market, about the economy, in many cases, that is a lens that naturally does not come to people when they think about business analytics. Because by definition, you work with what is far more easily and available with you and is available in large quantities. And again, given today's digital work processes, a lot of organizations generate a lot of internal data. The fact that again you can use either what your competition is putting out in the public domain, or you could literally scrape what your competition is putting out in the public domain, what industry associations are telling you about what is happening, or what some interesting proxies may be telling you, either upward in your supply chain or downward in your supply chain, or your peers, what is it that they are doing, can give you so much more insight. So that sometimes I have found very fascinating, that people have looked deeply inwards but not necessarily looked externally outwards. And then sometimes what happens is you end up doing the same strategic decisions across organizations, when one organization could have just simply learned from the other organization. Right? So from a private sector perspective, just the internal versus external is an interesting one. From a government perspective, the folks who in general are on the other side of disseminating data, uh, I think while there has been generally more openness to releasing data, uh, there are segments of the economy where a lot more data could potentially get released without it creating any flutter otherwise, and could create just so much of ease of understanding of what is happening in the country, and hence also what sort of business ideas people should pursue, what sort of careers people should pursue, etc. One of my favorite asks, for example, is of, let's say, the income tax data that is available with the government. The government does give out across different industries, and I think there is a list of almost 1,000 odd industries, in which the number of firms that are there and the total profit that that firm has made. Right, that data is just a very powerful data for people to keep seeing which industries are doing well. Is there where you want to set up your business? Is that where you want to build your career, etc.? Is a fascinating data set that is available. Can it be available in greater granularity, much more ease of collecting that data and disseminating it? Should there be more analysts looking at that data and talking about it? Uh, all of those are, I think, natural journey that India as a country is taking. That's on the direct tax side. And on the indirect tax side, just the ability of the government to talk to us about, hey, what is happening in the consumption market, given whatever is there in the GST, is just very large. We just have to be expansive in our thinking of what can be released without it impacting any sort of either security concerns and or personal privacy concerns.
Right. And that brings me to another question, Akhilesh. Are there private entities which you think, and you don't have to name them, but do you think they actually have a responsibility to share a lot more data than what they are doing today, because that will be for the public good?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't place the responsibility of sharing data at either an individual or at an individual company level. Uh, in general, if you think about it, that will then start to become a lot more onerous on them. Of course, if you are public in any manner whatsoever, so either you are a public listed company, for example, which means you have raised money from a large number of people, then of course you need to disclose so that your shareholders and prospective shareholders or debt holders get to know more about you. Or if you're in public life, if you're a politician, if you're a bureaucrat, a judge, etc., you should be disclosing a lot more about yourself, because that's just by the nature of the objective associated with you, which is public. Um, Other than that, as a private citizen or as a private limited company or as a private enterprise, I wouldn't put the onus on individuals that they should be disclosing a lot more. And again, to a large extent, if you think about it, individual data points are not necessarily informative. It
Right.
is when you start to look at some of these things and aggregate that they start to make a lot more sense. Frankly, what Akhilesh's height is an irrelevant number, or what his income is an irrelevant number. But if you see that the average height in India of 40-year-old males has been going up cohort by cohort, that tells you about what is happening to nutrition in India, for example, right? So that is a far more interesting number to look at. Or if the wealth or incomes of, again, 40-year-old women is going up, right? That tells you so much about what has changed in the labor force dynamics. You really don't need to know individual persons either income or status or any of those metrics. So I would think about it from a more abstract perspective and a wider perspective than for individuals.
Okay, that's very interesting, because that brings me to the next question that I had. You started with public policy, public markets, and started at a very macro level in your own career, right?
Hmm.
And now you have moved into this role of being a co-founder at Thurro,
Hmm.
which I think is going bottom up in the whole space of alternate data, right? So how is this, you know, parsing for you individually? And I'm talking about Akhilesh, the person here, right? Very, very specific to you.
So if you look at the book, The Making of India, as I said, it put together data from a wide variety of sources. Uh, Frankly, across the 8-9 chapters, I think each chapter would have had at least 5 to 10 unique different sources from where we would have picked this thing up. In Thurro, what I realized is that we are pulling together data from some 800 odd different sources, and those numbers keep increasing, and the intensity and the depth at which we are able to collect that data, keep it processed and keep it ready for analysis, and do the type of analysis that can be done on that, that just the power has increased dramatically. One of the pet projects that I have in mind, and I hope just this universal declaration of some of these things means that kainat mere liye kaam karegi types, uh, is that I want to write The Making of India once again, but write it with live charts. If you look at the book today, the way a book works is, you have written it once. I wrote it in 2015, and it is bound in that edition.
Correct.
But a lot of those data points, and a lot more of data points and analytical capabilities that have developed since then, you can do and keep them ready and alive, so that, hey, the 2027 India that you want to look at, as long as your frameworks are broadly in place, the broad storyline, how it is changing in the context of the data changing, you can begin to rewrite far more quickly. And that should be a live book. So in some sense, as I think about it, it's not very different from what I was doing earlier. It's just because it has become so expansive, so in depth, and tech needs to be brought to bear here, that I find that this is a different way in which you approach the same problem of understanding this vast country where just so many things are changing so simultaneously.
Right. And does that give you a vantage point or an advantage in terms of you having traversed this, journey from that very macro level to what you're doing now at Thurro? Does that give you an advantage, or, are you able to do something which others can't think of?
I wish that is a competitive advantage and a mode that I have. But I think what these various roles have helped me do is at least piece together how one should think about the availability of data, the type of analysis that you can do. How do you link up between two different sectors? Again, going back to that port plus toll as an example, right? Uh, your ability to look at the wider picture in depth and bring linkages, I think that is higher, that is wider for me. I don't think it is unique. A lot of economists, a lot of strategists, thinkers, etc., would be cross-pollinating their ideas, thinking deeply about economy and sectors and companies and even individuals and policies in a cross-functional perspective. So I don't think it is unique. But is it something that is distinctive and brings some interesting ability for us at Thurro to look at different things and bring them together? I think it does. and I hope it does also.
Right. So you again, at Thurro, you are getting exposed to people who are generating data. You are also now with your customers looking at people who are consuming this data and trying to make sense of it, trying to unearth some insights that probably others have not, had the eye to look for, and all of these things, right? So, in your view, what is the conventional wisdom about data strategy in India that is deeply flawed? Where do people go in with some set, biases or preconceived notions, which you think is, taking them astray?
I wouldn't say flawed in many of these cases. I would just say that the expansion of data's availability, the depth of the data that is available has just become very large. And maybe people have not yet woken up to uh, the possibilities that that data can work for you. I'll give you an interesting example that we are working with for a client. All of us know about the Global Capability Center that has become the big story in India. Indeed, the entire services export, a large part of that is now held by these various companies coming in here. Now, there are multiple ways in which you would think about this GCC boom that is taking place there. One of the things that we started working with our clients is to track the EPFO numbers, the Employee Provident Fund numbers of these GCCs, and see how they are increasing over a period of time. That has multiple implications. Once you know that larger number of GCCs are growing, one, the number is growing, and two, the number of employees are growing, it has impact on its real estate demand, right? Then you can begin to think about which real estate companies in and around which area could benefit. That could happen both from the commercial perspective of where you would build out offices, and then the residential offshoot. And then you could again begin to think about tertiary value add that could happen. Either people would buy more cars, etc., in that area, or more food and restaurants, etc., would come together. Maybe even education, hospitals, etc., would come, right? So using just one data set of EPFO, one linkage that you can draw is entire real estate consumption sector. The other interesting use case that the client puts it to is to say that if a particular uh, company is coming in and doing work of India, potentially it will outsource less to its IT vendors. Is that a thesis that works out in reality or not? That is something that we keep working closely with the client to see whether, as company A, which was outsourcing work to, let's say, an IT company in India, becomes bigger and bigger here, is it giving lesser work to IT companies because now they just have their in-house capability as opposed to outsourcing capabilities? That's an interesting way of looking at the same data set to try and understand what could happen to a very large sector in the country. So the point is, the data sets may be out there. How do you use and what do you use them for is something that people need to imbibe a lot more.
Right. So, a cynical question here, right? I think back in 2008 to 10, I was part of this, innovation group in Cognizant, where we used to work on a lot of this natural language processing and sentiment analysis, a lot of, database tools. I think one of the ideas that we had then, or this was something which was worked on by some of the team members, was on cricket analytics, right?
Okay.
Because cricket, by the nature of the sport, you get so many discrete events, right? Each delivery is a discrete event, and you can actually see that, okay, bowler has bowled this way, batsman has played this shot, there is a fielder. There's a lot of data that is available, and you can actually do a lot of analysis. Right? In a one day, you're talking of 300, plus 10 odd, data points. Right? And we thought this is great analysis that we can provide to the commentators, and they can actually give lot richer analysis of the sport. And we try to get through to somebody and see if we can actually help these broadcasters. And that guy said that there's only one commentator who actually does some kind of research. The others are happy to just go and continue doing what they have been doing forever, right? And sad to say they're still doing the same thing even now, 15 years later, when you actually have even more data, a lot more capability. The point being, there will be some people who will just go ahead and say that मुझे लगता है यहाँ पे मुझे बिल्डिंग बना देना चाहिए. IT के लोग आ जाएंगे. Would not even have made the distinction between IT and a GCC employee
Sure.
in his mind, and will probably, given that it is India, will actually do well and be under this impression that his gut feel is enough, right? So do you see those kind of players, who still say that data veta kuch nahi chahiye India mein? Be the people who are your customers, do they see it as a competitive advantage? Do they see this as a differentiator, or is it a story they are telling themselves that no, I'm more evolved, so I'm just going to do this in a better, more scientific manner? What is your take on that?
So multiple points on this. One is my co-founder Karthik would have been very happy to hear this cricket analogy. Indeed, one of the things that he does or did a lot more as a side project along with Thurro was to do a lot of cricket analytics. So maybe the two of you should speak on that. Having said that, I think if you even look at the sort of analytics that you see on TV these days, whenever a ball is bowled, etc., there is a segment of population that is very, very interested. Is it willing to pay? Is there understanding for that? Those are separate questions, and those are commercial questions more than the interest question. Indeed, the whole Moneyball thesis that took place in the US on sports, the same idea can be applied to a wide variety of sectors, including for cricket. So that there will be a set of people who would value this. I think that is a very fair assumption to make. Does this impact the life of others? Of course it does. Anybody who comes up with the money making system, in a sense, if you will, the Moneyball idea, if you will, how do I place my bet, on which players do I place my bet, such that I minimize my cost but I'm still able to get good returns from those players. Indeed, that plays out in every IPL auction, in a manner of speaking. Now, again, as I said, I've been lucky, if you will, that I started out in the world of finance, where again, data is core to how people think about their decisions. So to that extent, we end up with a client suite which is either what I call the buy side, or asset managers, or sell side, who are the advisors and the brokers, or indeed even regulators or high frequency traders, etc., for whom this data can be a significant competitive advantage at various levels. The various levels being just the fact that the data has come, and the data can come quickly to me, allows me to take fast decisions of getting in or getting out of a stock. If you are a high frequency trader, just the fact that the data is available that you can trade on can be of significant value. It could be of significant value of just saying that, hey, I can now analyze a wider portion of the industry that I could not earlier, or go deeper into a company that I could not earlier, because the industry association or the regulator is giving out that data. So for example, the Vahan data that comes out, where you are able to see where, in which part of the country, which type of vehicles are selling. It's a fantastic ability to get insights into the growth of the country, the prosperity of the country, the nature of purchases that are taking place. Has the ratio of four-wheelers to two-wheelers changed in a particular area? Is one competitor doing better? Who should I back if I was a financier? Some of those decisions become just so much more fine-tuned when you are thinking about these data sets. And again, as I said, buy side, sell side, regulators, corporate, many of them use these data sets to then derive value out of it. So to that extent, you have to find your right buyers. Thankfully, the number is large and growing. So yes.
Yeah. Good. So this question may sound like, preaching to the choir, but let's just take our example, right? I mean, the question that I wanted to ask was, if you were to advise a founder, maybe 5 years later, that person wants to have built a proper, data native company where data is a big strategic advantage for that company. What would you advise? I will make that more personal.
Okay.
So, and I'll give you some constraints also. So, Sirisha and I are, pitting Align by Design. Now, we will not have the advantage of the data that, your BCG and McKinsey have had for maybe hundreds of years. Uh, but we have this tendency or have this desire to make a company which will use data. So currently we have our own data that we are generating in whatever way, right? And using data in a very loose sense here, right? So what can we do to be able to say in 2030 that, oh, this last 5 years, given the advice from Akhilesh, we could build this fantastic company?
Okay. Let me come to the advice, but I left a part of your question unanswered. So I think there is a linkage between these two. You mentioned an interesting point about saying that a local developer may still build a building and wouldn't care whether an IT worker is coming in to live there or a GCC worker, etc. In a high growth environment, and I take a 6-7% sort of real growth in any economy as a high growth environment, it may be well nigh impossible to distinguish between luck and skill.
Correct.
Because naturally the tide is rising, everybody rises with it. Even if you've risen 4% or 8%, the delta may not be material. It's when the tide is low, then your ability to have discerned that, hey, I should have bet on this locality because XYZ variables were changing here. There is just so much more value. So first of all, my hope for you and Sirisha and for all of us is that India continues to remain a rising tide. So some of our follies and mistakes, if any, that we make along the way get drowned in the tide that rises with us. Having said that, we also have to be very, very conscious and cognitive about the competition around us and how we should think about being more sharp, more focused, etc. And in that, the role that data can play is useful across sectors. Now, you are in the world of say consulting and trying to understand what is happening in different organizations. What are the things that you could numerically convert things to? Now, I am thinking off the top of my head, but and this goes back, by the way, to an interesting research I think I read at HBR, where they worked with Microsoft to analyze email patterns of people to say who are the people in the organization, who are the nodes that everybody connects to. Now, in today's day and age, it may not be email, it may be a combination of email plus maybe a Teams, a Slack, a WhatsApp, or whatever. But that's an interesting way to try and understand how the organization, who are the key pillars of the organization, or who are the pillars around whom people rally. Are they natural leaders? Are they people who the organization will turn to in times of crisis or in terms of large opportunity, etc.? Is there a way for you to imbibe some of these numerical database things in the way you design strategy for organizations? This could be one way to think about it, right? One, it differentiates. You get an ability to talk about the offerings that you have to your clients in a different manner. Two, I think over a period of time, you will also build your hypotheses and frameworks on the back of data that is coming. What sounds like an interesting way of doing things may or may not be interesting, but unless you have tested it over 2, 3, 5 different tries, you will not even know. But once you'll know, that can become a very significant differentiating insight for you. I would think along some of those lines to say, which aspects of my interaction can I convert into data, and then how can I use that analytical tools that are available in and around data to see what sort of interesting insights could emerge, both for myself as well as for my clients.
Right.
Any sense at all?
Yeah, so partly. So, is there an advantage that incumbents have, given that they have a large volume of data, that the emerging companies will never be able to sort of bridge?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. You would be surprised that especially today, where the availability of data, as I said, both in terms of quantum as well as in terms of the breadth of data that is available, is so large that it is not as if people who have previous data are sitting at any advantage which is very very material to them. Many of these data sets, unless they are transient or proprietary, are available for most people in the public domain, right? Now, what do I mean by transient and proprietary? Is that something that happens which you haven't captured at that point in time? So, for example, let's say if there was a bestseller list that is published on a daily basis and you have not kept track of that bestseller list on a daily basis, then you don't know and you don't have access to that data. But if it is something that you can go back in time and recreate that data with the data tools that are available now, your ability to come up to speed is very high. Of course, you can work with entities like Thurro who can help you. But that plug aside, if it is proprietary data, if, for example, some of these consulting firms that you mentioned or any other organizations have created a proprietary set either of panel or of a way of collecting that data or of uh, I don't know if manipulating is the right word, but working with that data to generate insights. Uh, those particular things, of course, remain proprietary to those organizations from where this data emerges. But that does not mean that the field is not becoming vast and large, right? So, for you, I think, or for us, the thing is the thing to think about is where are the new places from where I can begin to build that competitive insight? What somebody else has, they have. But is there a new way I can look at the problem? Is there a new way in which I can bring insight to the person? And again, go back to the thinking that I said that a lot of data that people look at is very internal focus. What I have, I feel very, very proud, and the endowment effect of that data is just very, very high. Frankly, for you, the field is wide open because even if you can bring people to look at different sets of data, that could be just eye-opening for a lot of people.
Right. And would you say this is the differentiator between, say, a Lagarde and a winner in the data game per se? That how are they looking at data? Is that going to be the primary differentiator, or is it also going to be the infrastructure, data quality, how big the team is, number of GPUs you can afford? What's the killer advantage?
All of the things that you said now are in my mind. If you were to think of a cookbook, are all the ingredients: good quality data, higher number of data points, higher processing power, etc., etc. Eventually, what will differentiate is that chef who can think about what do I do with it? How do I create the perfect dish or a good quality dish out of all the inputs that are available to me, right? So to that extent, all of the things that we discussed about saying get more data, get more trained people who can work with it, get more GPUs, etc., is all great from an input perspective. अब करना क्या है? What is it that you do with it is important, and that I think is the unique insight that in effect the entrepreneur brings to the table. They may be running their own enterprises, they may be intra entrepreneurs, as some companies would like to call them, but what do you do with that? What competitive edge or market edge you are able to generate from that is where the skill lies. uh, it may just be that you will say that, hey, you've been using 5 ingredients, can we add these 2 others that could make it to a better dish? Or you could say, hey, just throw off one of these, but instead of doing it in this particular process, can we run it in 3 different other processes and come up with something else? So that is where magic will happen. So the Lagarde's versus the winner analogy, if you were to use, it is in the chef and not in the not in the ingredients that go into it.
Right. Yeah. So thinking, talking about the ingredients, right? I think one thing that I've really been fascinated about Thorough is the Indian alternate data sets, right? And this comes from, a stray question that I had faced once after I'd done a book summary session at some event, where, so we were summarizing a particular book written by 2 American authors who have spent almost all their lives in America. So all the examples they had were from the US, right? It's a management book. So we had summarized that book. So it is not really our content. But somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you've shared only examples from US. India का आपने कुछ बताया नहीं." So then I told him that this was a summary of the book. It was not my stance at all. But that question has remained with me because a lot of the work and the body of research that has gone into either management science
Hmm.
or our general consumption.
Hmm.
I think the word is over, right? OUVRE, if I'm not
Wow.
wrong,
Okay.
is very Western, right?
Hmm.
I mean, the
Hmm.
first example that we could think of was Moneyball. As soon as you mentioned Moneyball, I said, yeah, I get
Hmm.
Moneyball.
Hmm.
But we haven't seen those kind of examples, or those things don't come up. In fact, I remember doing a podcast with Professor Chinmay Tumbe
Hmm.
of IMA,
Hmm.
and he does a lot of work in capturing business history.
Hmm.
And we have organizations which are 100 plus years old, and all of that, but not a lot of archives exist for
Yeah.
these companies, right?
Hmm.
So coming back to say my previous example of these companies which have been in existence for the last 100 plus years, and they might have a lot of proprietary data, but chances are that most of their proprietary data is going to be of companies from the US or Europe, right?
Mhm.
uh, may not have a lot of management related data from India, which is why I would feel fairly confident that okay, they don't really have a head start of 100 years,
Hmm.
as long as my playing arena is India.
Hmm.
But this brings me to the question of the quality of data, right? And why I'm so impressed with Thurro is because this is probably one of the first which gives me a very India view to what is happening around me, which is why I love seeing your posts. And
Hmm.
now that you've shared the access to me, I keep looking at what all I can see, right? So comment on that. Lot of the data that we have is very, very US, Western, including stuff that we have studied in our MBA and even later, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
so Western,
Hmm.
but where we are living is very different.
Hmm.
How does this, pass for you?
So first of all, thank you for all the good things that you had to say about Tharo, and hopefully we live up to all the exacting standards that you have and others have, and we all continue to pull each other up. So thank you for that. Uh, I think the point that you make is an important one, that many of our frameworks of thinking are also Western, but also a lot of anecdotes and examples that we use end up becoming Western simply because there has just been a lot more work that has happened on the data. Also, because a lot more data was collected and existed there. Having said that, you would know this almost as a fact that the Indian statistical system that Mahalanobis created around the 50s, etc., people from around the world would come in and learn from how the statistical system should be set up and what are the ways you would think about seeing what is changing in the economy, how do you measure it, how do you evaluate, etc., etc. So it's not as if India has not gone through its own ups and downs of setting up both institutions that have served the purpose of the day, the need of the hour, but also stood the test of time. So there have been some very fantastic institutions that have been created. Have Are we now in a situation where we can now create a lot more insights on the back of our own data? Yes. If anything, the digital transformation that India has seen, the jam, if you think about it, right? The entire Jandhan, the ability for people to have their bank accounts, the Aadhaar, the unique identity, and the fact that we are connected with each other, the mobile, the jam trinity, as it is called, is something that has given us the ability to track ourselves as a community, as a society, just so much better. And it is a matter of time before you begin to see a lot more deep India work begin to come through. So whether we will have an example of a Moneyball equivalent in India, I think frankly it's a matter of time. When the sheer size of IPL as compared to some of the other sports, frankly you will see that play out in cricket itself. So maybe the cricket analytics work that you were doing, maybe time to revive it once more and bring it to the fore. So to that extent, it is in my mind also a matter of how developed the economy is, how much um, its own ability to look itself in the mirror is sometimes, again, in India had gone through a phase where it was not growing as well. It had gone through its own economic crises, etc., etc. While there is interesting data that is available, and I'm sure people at that time were working on that data sets then. Uh, just the fact that we are now able to collect, disseminate, and still look the data in the eye and feel both comforted and still energized enough to do something more just creates that flywheel of the fact that we will create more data, do more analysis, and also build companies and strategies which will get differentiated on the back of this. So a long way of saying that I think we are on the right path. And it's a matter of time before you see some of these anecdotes and examples turning to India.
And anything that you would want to see more of, which would help
Oh,
accelerate the journey.
lots of things. And again, you could think about that in the public domain, where there can be very large data sets that can give us insights into what is happening. I alluded also, for example, to the entire GST data that is available. NPCI has of late started releasing data on where Indians are spending their money on. Right, all the way from barbers to taxi. Now you can see where the UPI transactions are taking place. So to that extent, we are beginning to see organizations that are giving out a lot more data that gives you a lot more insight. These insights sometimes come at a statistics level and not at a data level. And by that, I mean that people will aggregate these insights and give them out to you. The more granular the data point that are available, the more refined my strategy can be. So if, for example, in a lot of, let's say, peri-urban areas, a lot more taxis are being booked using API, it could give me some sense of saying, hey, this is where the city is growing. Right. So that depends on what level of granularity data can be made available. As I said, it can be made available from a public policy and a public data set perspective across a wide range of things. And there are things that India does very well in terms of that data dissemination, but there are still many places where this can be strengthened, made better, made more frequent, made more granular, made more deeper, etc.
Right. Uh, Speaking about you, Akhilesh, personally, you moved from a role of doing commentary and research.
Mm-hmm.
Not trying to belittle that, but that, in my opinion, is still an easy job as compared to what you are doing now, right? Which is being a co-founder at Thurro. So, was there something that you had to change in terms of how you looked at life, or was there something which was there a very strongly held belief earlier which you then had to change? Tell me more about that.
So while this is an important and a big transition, actually my bigger transition in my own mind is when I moved from the private sector to the public sector.
Okay.
Uh, right. So that is a different world altogether. The difference between Bombay and Delhi just simply cannot be captured in one experience or in one lifetime, frankly. It did lead to another book. So my second book, Through the Looking Glass, actually just chronicles what I saw in Delhi, and at least the sort of frameworks that I could begin to build about us as citizens and bureaucrats and politicians, etc., and how all three of them are interacting, etc. Because it's just such a very different world in terms of the perspectives that come to bear. So I'll come back to the co-founding and startup situation, but if you just move from the private to the public sector, multiple things change. One is, in the private sector, na, life is somewhat easier because you are doing what you would in some sense called shareholder value maximization.
Correct.
Right? Whether you are as an entrepreneur doing it or you are a corporate employee and that corporate is trying to maximize shareholder value, you're reasonably clear ki boss, this is how I should think about profit. This is the amount of capital that will get deployed. Wo ROC banana hai. And for this, these are the cost levers, these are the revenue levers, etc., etc. And the organization is to most extent working in the same direction and working towards that.
Yeah.
Also, the time duration in which you get measured is a shorter one. Typically, a quarter or a year. At best, you will make 3-year goals, 3-year strategies, etc. The moment you shift to the public sector, your number of stakeholders just dramatically increases, right? It is the citizen of the country, it is the industry, it is the current set of people and the posterity that will come thereafter. It is the precedents that have followed you into this place, etc. So to that extent, the sheer variety of stakeholders that you need to take along just becomes larger, and that by definition is a more difficult problem to solve. And two, it isn't obvious that it is just a money problem. It is not an ROCE problem, right? How do you think about status, about respect, about opportunity, about equality? A lot of other factors come into bear. And third, the time element is not measured in quarters. Quarters में तो कई बार meeting ही नहीं हो पाती हैं, right? But what you will do now will have impact over just multiple decades, if not multiple generations. So the way people think about it is very different. So for me, that was a very, very revealing um and a very new perspective that I was able to gather as I moved from Bombay to Delhi. And then coming back, you could just see it in just such sharp relief as to how different these two worlds were. In that sense, the transition from one private sector where you were in a large organization to a much smaller organization which you're trying to grow and make something big, it's easier. Huh? So because you are doing value maximization there, you will hopefully do value maximization here. If you do a good job of it, the payoffs can be much larger than when you are in a larger organization, etc. Having said that, of course, if you are a co-founder versus if you are leading a narrower role in even a larger organization, the sheer set of responsibilities that you need to deal with, or the sheer set of variabilities that you need to deal with, obviously increase. So everything is your problem now in that sense, which you could have simply shrugged off your shoulders maybe at 6 p.m. on a Friday and say, hey, let's come back after and check up on Monday 9 p.m. Not that that is something that one can do in a corporate life, but you could think about it slightly more differently. So the sort of challenges are different, but nothing as dramatic as moving from the private sector to public sector.
Right.
That is a different world altogether.
Yeah.
I would not recommend it for those who can't take such dramatic changes, but those who can, I would strongly recommend that this cross-pollination of folks who can move from Bombay to Delhi, in a sense, if I were to use the words metaphorically,
Correct.
there should be more of such movements that should happen.
Right. And did you do something to actually make that transition easier for yourself? Did you have to remind yourself of something every day, in every meeting, that no, my time horizon is now very different. There are multiple stakeholders. How did you manage that transition?
So the preparation is an interesting question because I had literally not spent even one night in Delhi prior to moving there. So for me, this was a completely different world. But two or three things helped. One is obviously the set of people that I was working together with, the political class as well as the bureaucratic class, etc. They, of course, invested a significant amount of time in with me and in me potentially, so that I could become more effective. So one, I have to acknowledge the fact that it is not easy for an external party to come in and be part of a larger ecosystem which has such a long history and set of people who have been working diligently at it over a long period of time. So they pulled me in and made me come in into that position in a very effective manner. The other is, I think I walked in with almost a sense of wonder. And if you read the book also, literally you can find that on a daily basis, I was writing almost one page or two pager every day to say, hey, this is something that I saw today happen, which is so different from what I was seeing happen in Delhi, in Mumbai.
Well,
Which is almost like a diary, is how it started out for. Indeed, the book starts with an anecdote of someone who is preparing for one of the state civil services examination and calls up the office of the minister to say that I have a ticket to go from city A to Delhi. Can you help get it confirmed? There are quotas that VIPs can help confirm, etc., etc. And the book starts off by just thinking about the fact that someone who is walking into the world of public service potentially uh, is is willing to take favors for such a small thing in a sense. And the moment you take favors, do you become beholden? Now, is that the way to look at it? Or the way to look at it is that there is just another word that I use in the book is called abundance of scarcity. In many cases, there is just significant scarcity. And the fact that there has been general abundance of scarcity, you are just required to do some things that put you in that situation. Now, for me, both of these things were perspectives that I was just picking up, absorbing, writing about it, ruminating, etc. So I gave myself a lot of time also as I thought about these things. The good news is that this whole abundance of scarcity point, in a sense, again, as India continues to grow economically, the amount of scarcity begins to come down, definitely at the margin, and also meaningfully, right? So to the extent that we can keep the economic engine going and running, uh, hopefully our ability to go back to the government or officials and ask for favors converts into more consumption that you can do on your own. And that transition in itself is a very interesting transition. And so those are things that I would look at from a very different eye or a perspective that I would bring to the table, because for me this was just completely new. Why would someone do this, or how would someone do this, would be interesting. So more curiosity, and the fact that people around me just helped me come in there.
Right. And when you got back to Mumbai, uh, was it just getting back to, old times, or
No.
did you have a challenge?
Oh, massive, massive challenge. See, because what happens is, and I think that is a challenge of any entrepreneur in a sense, especially someone who has done, let's say, 5, 6 different types of gigs. And if you are looking to be back in the corporate sector, for example, uh, people don't know how to place you, right? So, uh, as one of my mentors said, boss Akhilesh, if you're risen from being an analyst to an associate to a vice president to a president, etc., then I know ki boss, I need to make you a senior vice president, right? Or senior president, or whatever it is. But I mean, you are going sometimes doing a startup, sometimes going to write on India and writing a book, then going out and working with the minister and all of that. So I don't even know how and where I should place you. And I think that is fair on the part of anybody engaging with you, because most organizations are built on linear career curves, right? So in some sense, people who try and experiment a lot of different things are not necessarily built out for uh, linear corporate roles in a sense, but which also means that by definition, corporates are not necessarily built for folks who are generally willing to shake things up and do some things differently. So it's not easy. So which is why, as I said, for the transition, I wouldn't recommend it to just about anyone, but folks who are willing to take that risk, who are equipped both mentally, emotionally, financially, etc., in some sense, can take that risk. I would strongly recommend it, but it is not easy. Transition one way in or transition one way out is not that easy.
Okay. So it's interesting, aspirational, and scary what you're saying.
But fun all the completely. It's like a roller coaster ride, boss. You may be scared when you walk into it, when you go down, when you go up, etc. It is all very scary. But once you come out of it, you come out alive.
Yeah, so speaking to somebody who, I think at the age of whatever 8 or 9, when somebody asked me, "Beta, bade ban ke kya banoge?" So I'd said IAS officer, and I think I did prepare for UPSC once, but made the mistake of taking maths as the subject.
Oh.
And general studies was quite good for me, but maths was not. So I didn't take that exam back then.
Oh.
And yeah, this has been one of those unfulfilled wishes. And in fact, when I went to MDI, one of the first things that I was telling myself was, oh, finally I'm going to actually be living close to the corridors of power. I think it was as wrong as it could be, but that was one of the things that came to mind when I had got the offer from MDI. That yeah, so this is all that you've done is of a lot of interest to me personally. So really jealous of what you've done till now.
But can I make a couple of quick points on that though?
Yeah.
One is the government did try over
I
the
know.
last couple of terms to do lateral entry.
Correct.
And I think that has been, uh, again, for lack of a better adjective, an interesting experiment. So it is not as if the government has also not looked at that as an idea.
Hmm.
Uh, and that happened obviously at very senior levels, at a joint secretary level, etc. But even otherwise, at more younger levels, more in what are called the young professionals, etc. The government does engage a lot more. So there are opportunities. Now, you may not qualify for a young professional, but there are different ways in which a policy, if that is close to you, can be impacted. And again, I go back to data as one tool in just thinking about what is it the change, what is the change that you want, uh, documenting it, talking about it, convening folks around it, thinking about what the change should be, what the change process should be. A lot of that can be done not necessarily by sitting in the corridors of power, but also from outside it, right? So whether it is through a think tank, or whether it is through industry associations, whether it is simply as a personal citizen in the country, right? A lot of power that social media vests in us these days,
Right.
if used responsibly, can move things. So my only submission in a sense will be, please be an active citizen, impact policy, work closely on many of these topics. It's good to have different worldviews, especially if you have them. That's great, but bring them out and put them out in the domain.
Right. Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think I was one of the first people to use RTI also back in 2008, 7 or 8, just
Okay.
around the time when it had come out. So,
And what did you find?
no, let's not go into that.
Oh, okay.
So tell me more about Thurro, what you're doing at Thurro, what's next for Thurro?
So Thurro is what we call an alternate data plus artificial intelligence company. The way it started, as we were discussing earlier, there are a large number of data sets that are now beginning to get available in India across sectors. So I think across some 30 odd sectors, we collect very, very deep data. It could be something as deep as saying every hour or so, what has been the temperature at practically every latitude, longitude in India, to saying how many employees work in the top 500 companies in the country, to saying what vehicles are selling where, to what toll is being collected. So just think about any data set that is available in India. If it has not already been onboarded onto Thurro, it is in the process of being onboarded. So that's something that we will continue to do, which is go deeper and deeper into various sectors, and just be a repository, one for data's sake to start out with, because just the ability to then use that data quickly, for it to be available at a moment's notice when you want to use it, that in itself is a non-trivial problem to solve. Today, for example, if you were to look at different types of data sets across different places, you'll have to run and figure out where to get different data sets from. So one of the things that we want to be able to build in Thurro is the ability to say, hey, if any data that I want about Indian companies, sectors, economy, uh, I just need to go to Thurro. So that's the deepening of Thurro data sets that we'll keep doing. Uh, Again, we'll continue to also add standard databases, as we like to call them, which is all the price data that comes in from markets, for example, the stock price data. We already collect a lot of mandi data, for example. So we know individually at every mandi level what type of price points are playing out for different commodities. And I talk about how we use that in some various modeling, etc., that we do when we talk about it, right? So one is we'll keep adding different types of data sets, such that this is a complete portal where you can come in and look at. The interesting thing, and we alluded to the fact that now when we think about data, we also think about language. We are collecting a lot of written text, high quality written text, which could come from companies, regulators, industry, government, etc., and putting them together in our data lake, which allows us to then read through that and figure out what is it that is changing both in the narrative as well as in the data, right? So what is the sentiment, to the point that you were mentioning earlier, that could be changing, or what is the stance that the management has taken or the regulator has taken on a particular issue? What is it that analysts are asking companies about on a particular topic? Are people talking more about inflation, or are they talking more about growth? Are they talking about opportunities or credit costs, etc.? Right. So your ability to look at data not just from a numerical perspective, but also um, text perspective is something that has become easier in the world of AI, and that's again something where Thurro is investing heavily on. So these are the two broad pillars. Now, around this, of course, we continue to innovate on the work processes that our clients need, and so we are able to give them very specific use cases of technology that we bring to the table, whether it is with respect to understanding deeply on what their managements are talking about, for example. So can you make it as live as is possible, right? So one value that you can add to data in general is that it is available the moment it gets generated. So that's something that we are able to do with numerical data on a regular basis. We will go and put and update our databases. Can you do that with a lot of text data? That's something that we are now beginning to do. So as soon, for example, if this conversation is happening, can I transcribe it quickly and make it available to my users, who can then begin to see what is being spoken of and what is happening in the economy? That's something that we are building deeply towards. So those are some of the building blocks that we are currently working on. The big picture idea is data is, as I said, ingredients. Eventually, you need to build recipes out of it. So, for example, one of the recipes that we already built is something called the nowcast. The idea is that because you have such large data sets available, your understanding of the economies and sectors is just so much deeper. So, as I said, we collect data from so many mandis about so many commodities, right? So every day we end up having anywhere between 30,000 to 50,000 price points that we know from mandis, from e-commerce platforms, from various other government agencies that would release different price points, etc., Department of Consumer Affairs, etc. We are able to put that together at the end of the month and say what the inflation in the country is. We do it currently for food and beverages. That's something that we begin to expand for general inflation in the country. Uh, Again, I know we'll go back to a Western framing of this, but if you've heard of the Billion Prices project, in a sense, right, that's something that you can now build on the Thurro platform. The inflation nowcast of Thurro is a Billion Prices project. You collect data from just so many different places and put it in the basket in which Indians typically consume, and you're able to come to a much better understanding of what is happening significantly before the official data comes out. But the objective is not necessarily to beat the official data to the timeline, but to act as some sort of a directional understanding of what is happening, especially when you look at data sets which are granular and reasonably spread out. You can weed out the noise and get to the central tendency just so much better, right? So for example, going back to the toll example that we were talking about, if from 1,000 toll plazas in the country you are seeing that the average volume growth, the number of vehicles that are moving in, is growing at, let's say, a 6% number, you have a reasonable understanding that that's the central tendency of where growth in the country is, right? Some will grow at -10 also, some will grow at +15 also. But once you have a deep central tendency of where growth is happening across such disaggregated data sets, you are just able to build so much better. So again, coming back from data, we're beginning to build models, and from those models, we are beginning to build in the insights. So hopefully some of the Moneyball stuff you will see come out of Thurro in due course.
Right. And do you also foresee other startups, products building on top of Thorough data? One example that came to mind, and I may be completely wrong, I'm just quoting from memory, that the onion prices in India, because you mentioned Mandi, this idea, or that the thing came to mind, where onion prices in India sometimes shoot up very irrationally. And that's because they say Lasalgaon near Nasik is like the biggest mandi for onions, right?
Yeah.
So I remember reading an article where they said that there's really no reason why it should go up. Some vendor, some farmer says कि नहीं मुझे इतना करना है, या some trader buys at an inflated rate, and then everyone just wants to match that rate, right? And that's how it goes up. There is no real reason why. It's not a question of scarcity. It's not a question of weather conditions. Nothing like that. Somebody somewhere has become an outlier, and then everyone else just wants to match them, right? So in this case, if I were to have an app which would actually be working with insights from Thurro, which is looking at all the mandis and giving me some price guidance, maybe things are not going to be so erratic and irrational, but are going to be rooted in reality. Is that something which can happen?
So yes, but let me actually expand the scope of this conversation in a sense to say that one is data as a tool, as a mitigant in saying, if I were to use your framing and put it in more technical words, of a market capture in a sense, right? Somebody who is, let's say, a monopsonist in the way you are saying it, one buyer says that I'm going to buy at this price, or maybe one seller saying that I will sell only at this price, right? So either a monopolist or a monopsonist is willing to do that at either a high or a low price, right? One is data can just help you say that, hey, there is only one bid or one offer on the table. So even when you go to a stock market, you are able to see whether there is an order book, whether it's filling up or not filling up, etc. Data can at best play an informational and an advisory role both to market participants as well as to policymakers. Eventually, the framework that needs to come through is how do we think about supply and demand in the country in general? In general, are we using the data sets to inform us that, hey, on a consistent basis, onion consumption in India is growing at X percentage and isn't remunerative enough for the producers to produce and bring that to the table? If it is not because of either a natural calamity or anything that does not allow the produce to come to the market, are we in a position to open trade in a meaningful manner? Are we able to bring in more imports or do exports at a time when these things can happen? So data can at best be the building block of saying what are the policy tools that I will eventually bring to bear and what is the market structure that I will create on the back of those policy tools. So I I hope it was so simple as saying that if the data is there, people will be able to make those changes that can inform a buyer to go or not go to a particular mandi, or a seller to go or not go to a particular mandi. Maybe once people realize that the prices are high at a particular mandi, a lot of people come in there and that market structure evolves in a manner that prices begin to then cool. But what you need to build is not just the data, but the entire architecture of saying that this is how markets function. People are not bound to a particular mandi that they need to go to from where they will sell. And that can happen either because of regulation. Sometimes APMC mandi requires people to come to a particular place. Sometimes it could just be distance, that people don't want to travel such large distances. The economics don't make sense, or they simply don't have the ability to do it. So it's more an infrastructure plus market development plus a regulatory and a policy matter also, as much as it is data specifically in this case. But you could argue it the other way around, and I've seen that play out in civil aviation, for example. Every time around Diwali and Chhat here, or New Year's and Christmas times, prices will suddenly shoot up, and in many cases there will also be demand on social media, etc., or even people coming up and saying that there should be price caps. Now, that is a philosophy of life to say that should there be a price cap, or is price an indicator of saying that there has been a sudden demand surge and what needs to happen is a supply response to it? Now, in some cases, supply responses are immediately possible. In some cases, supply responses are not immediately possible. In that case, how do you let the market function such that the volatility does not scare away consumers over a long period of time, or scares away suppliers also, right? If once prices go up for 5 days in a year, but 360 days in a year, they remain reasonably low, suppliers could also potentially get scared. So how do you create a clearing mechanism, literally, such that both suppliers and consumers can be in equilibrium? That is the entire synthesis from data to policy that one needs to think through. So data can help. That is the right building block on the basis of which policy should happen, but you need to take it to that next level of engagement to see what do you want to do with that.
Right. So my question, Akhilesh, is would Thurro be doing something like this, or do you foresee, other companies using Thurro as a platform to build something like this?
So different segments, different folks will use Thurro and build on top of Thurro. Corporates would potentially use it to try and understand what alternate data sets we are able to bring for their sectors, for their competitors, etc. There may be something as simple as saying, hey, where are my competitors opening stores? Right? And so should I follow that trajectory, or maybe should I flank them from a different direction? That could be a simple way in which people may begin to use alternate data. The other way could be to see, hey, as policymakers, I could see, and we discussed that example of saying, are in peri-urban areas, are we seeing a lot more traffic happen? You could also figure that out through tolls, for example, right? If a large number of private vehicles or passenger vehicles are going through tolls around the city, maybe the city itself is expanding. And so how do you think about building infrastructure on top of that? Maybe that's something that city corporations or larger organizations may want to pick that up from there. Third is the market design element that we just discussed, whether in aviation or in onions. So policymakers could begin to look at that. So I think the role, at least that we currently envisage for Thurro, is just getting the right data in place, which in itself, as I keep saying, is a challenging thing. And on top of that data, building the right models and bringing the right narrative to what we are seeing happen. Those are the things that we plan to do, we hope to do. On top of that, I'm sure people will build different things on top of it.
Okay. Okay. So, Akhilesh, I think like I keep telling all my guests, I don't think one conversation of 1 hour, 15 minutes is enough. We will have to do a part two. But I will end this conversation now. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you for some hot takes kind of questions.
Okay.
So hot takes. So don't overthink, don't think too long. Just give me the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
So one thing that you change your mind about in the last month.
Quite interestingly about India, I am reading The Shattered Lands by Sam Dalrymple, and the whole
Okay.
idea of India and how you should think about the political boundaries and the five partitions that he talks about has been fascinating and mind-opening. So,
Okay.
what India could have been, what India is, what India can be, are very interesting questions.
Okay. Yeah, I've been following him on Twitter. Haven't read any of his books yet, so I think I will, definitely take that up as a recommendation.
Yeah.
One book that you re-gift the most.
Re-gift the most. Okay, that'll tell you my life stage. But the book that I have ended up gifting the most is a book by June Oberlander. It's called Slow and Steady, Get Me Ready. It's a fantastic book which has, I think, some 250 different games that you can play with the child from week 0 to week 5, to year 5. So for every week, what is the child's broad development? And she goes to great lengths to say that this is not a benchmark for your child, but this is just to give you ideas on what you can do with the child at that point in time, which will just fire them up in how they think, how they grow, etc. And I think that book is something that I would have given out multiple copies to. I do end up regifting or buying books which are related to Indian economy, politics, etc., and do that. But none have come close to the June Oberlander book.
Okay, great, great. And you already sort of partly answered this question, but the final question, and I will qualify this, one book that you would rewrite, and this can't be a book that you have written. So tell me some other book that you would want to rewrite.
So as I said, I want to have a live book, which means that it keeps rewriting itself every year.
Yeah.
Right. So then every time you ask me this question, I can tell you, boss, मैं वही rewrite कर रहा हूँ.
Yeah, but वो option नहीं है. So you have to, I'm going to put you in the spot.
Book that I would rewrite. No, boss. Any author brings a very, very unique perspective. You cannot rewrite any book because you will insert yourself into that book, your own upbringing, experiences, the way you have imbibed the world. I don't think it would do any justice. You should pick up a topic, in my view, and de novo write about stuff. You should not. You should build on what you learn from some of the authors, but I wouldn't write or be in anyone's shoes in writing that. At least I can't.
Okay, okay. And one habit that has helped you work, non-work, anything.
So I'm very obsessive on details enough that I think if in a footnote there are two spaces, I am the one who calls it out and I will circle it. If a semicolon is continuing to remain in italics mode compared to it being straight in the entire sentence, I will find it. And so I am really obsessive on the details in general. Whether it has helped or not, I think it is more for my colleagues and peers to say. But I find that that obsession to detail is actually very, very useful when you're dealing with something as critical as data, and which has largely been my life, because your ability to understand the last level of nuance on what this data is saying with all its qualifiers uh, uh, and some sense the caveats that need to come with that data depends on how finely you look at it. So I know I've been very obsessive. I'm sure folks who have worked with me carry some of those scars. But that obsession to detail, especially when it comes to anything which has to be formally presented, anything on the back of which something else get developed, I go to great levels of details in that.
Okay, I hope this podcast, ticked off some boxes for the attention to detail. And on that note, thanks a lot, Akhilesh. It was fantastic. What, 1.5 hours spent? Didn't realize that it was 1.5 hours.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. This has been a fun conversation, and I look forward to another one.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.